Hey, Lighthouse. Well, let's have some devotions together and finish up Daniel chapter 1. Starting in verse 17, it says, "As for these four youths, God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And at the end of the time, when the king had commanded that they should be brought in, the chief of the eunuchs brought them in before Nebuchadnezzar, and the king spoke with them. And among all of them, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore they stood before the king, and in every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in all his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus." So you remember how we got here. Daniel and his friends, their city was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and they endured the tragedy of being on the business end of an absolute military destructive campaign. But instead of dying in the battle, they were, because they were young and wealthy and smart, they were kidnapped, exiled, brought to Babylon to be trained in the ways of the Chaldeans and the ways of the Babylonians, so that they might be wooed, lured into, working for Babylon. And Nebuchadnezzar's a brilliant, political mind, and he doesn't just want to destroy the intelligentsia in the places where he conquers. He wants to absorb them. He wants them working for him. So, and then you remember that these four men said, we can't do anything about being here. We're far away from Israel, but we're not going to defile ourselves. And they made this stand, and we talked about that yesterday. And really, you're going to see them make this stand over and over. I think yesterday I said something like everything works out for Daniel in this book. That's not the right way to say it, is it? It's just that Daniel continues to be faithful. Daniel lives a very hard life, even though it's a very successful life. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, these three friends of his, there's times of great success, but then there's times of great trial where they really have to again and again stand up for this commitment they made as young men, that they would not defile themselves with everything that Babylon has. And I think that we would just look at these few verses today and consider the situation that these four men are in, and consider how it's the same sort of situation that we're in many times. They are aliens in a foreign land. They are over and over given the opportunity to reject the true worship of the true God and instead worship the gods of the Babylonians. And here early in their life, they've made a decision that they're not going to do that. And God has blessed them. And I love that they're trained by the Chaldeans, but the writer of Daniel will say it was God who was training them. And that's you and me too. We come up in high school and college, and we're trained by people, by this world. We turn on the news and we're being trained. We turn on the ways we entertain ourselves, and we read books about philosophy, and there's earthly wisdom coming in. And yet you and I need to be the ones who say, yeah, I'm going to have the filter where I can learn how to exist in this world. Daniel and his friends not only learned how to exist in Babylon, but learned how to thrive in Babylon. They were the ones that Nebuchadnezzar really looked at and said, those guys are the best of them. And the author of Daniel is telling us, look, so they rejected the things that would defile them, and yet they had the wisdom to continue to learn the things they needed to learn to be useful in Babylon, to be successful in Babylon. And yet we're always fighting this battle that while they were learning what it meant to be a Babylonian, they were never going to defile themselves with Babylonian things. And that is a tension. That is a difficulty that you see throughout their lives. That's how you end up in a fiery furnace. That's how you end up in a lion's den, by having not just success, but by being scholars. Like, these are guys that learn how to do their job and learn how to do their job well. So they are not those who, some might say, well, if I got into Nebuchadnezzar's court, I would have started throwing punches. I would have been the assassin. Nebuchadnezzar was the terrible king that had destroyed Jerusalem. But Daniel's work is going to ultimately lead to Nebuchadnezzar's salvation. Like, Nebuchadnezzar is a terrible man who does terrible things and has a terrible season of his life where he completely loses his mind, and yet comes back and honors Daniel's God, because Daniel was able to learn how to be useful to Nebuchadnezzar and still not defile himself. Nebuchadnezzar looks at the three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace, and recognizes this other one in the furnace is like the son of the gods, and again honors their God. Well, why? Well, it wasn't because they had violently reacted and tried to assassinate Nebuchadnezzar, or said, "You can't make me, I'm going to run away." They decided not to head for the hills. They decided not to start an insurrection. Rather, they decided to walk this very difficult journey of having excellence in this world and not being defiled by this world. Maybe that would be something we would think about today. How we could be excellent in this world and not be defiled by this world. That we would see the places God sends us. This is just coming to my mind, but I was in a band for a long time, and we played every, bar and club in Orange County. And then what lasted longer than all those rock shows was being a worship leader. And it was really in those clubs and bars that God taught me to play guitar, that God taught me to be in front of a crowd, that God taught me how to be a worship leader. There just weren't enough reps on Sunday mornings. I wasn't good enough to play there yet. And so it was something that God used, because we decided as a band that we were going to try to be excellent in our field and yet not defile ourselves. So we were in those clubs and bars. We weren't drinking in those clubs and bars. We were in that community without being defiled by that culture. And I wonder if we could think today, in the business you're in the life you're living, in the neighborhood you're in, how we might be excellent in this world and yet be sure that we never defile ourselves. All right. Be loved.